The sun hung over Satara like a weight, pressing the heat into the dry earth until the road shimmered. 10-year-old Bimrao stepped toward the communal water pot, his throat tight, his tongue thick with the taste of dust. He reached out, fingers inches from the rim. Then, the air shifted. A teacher lunged from the shade, his hand a blur of motion. He struck the vessel, sending it spinning into the dirt. Water soaked into the parched ground, vanishing before it could touch a lip. Bimrao recoiled, his hands snapping back to his sides. He watched the other boys step forward, one by one, to drink from a fresh supply, while he remained rooted in the heat. No one looked at him. No one spoke. The silence was absolute, heavier than the midday sun. He stood there, fists clenched until his knuckles turned white, feeling the sting of the rejection deep in his chest. He did not cry. He did not beg. He simply turned away, walking back into the haze of the road, the realization hardening inside him like stone. His touch was treated as a poison. Years later, the dusty road of Satara was replaced by the claustrophobic silence of a library in New York. Bimrao sat at a desk buried under stacks of law books that towered like fortress walls. His eyes burned from hours of reading, but he did not blink. He traced the text with a steady finger, dissecting the mechanics of justice as if he were taking apart a machine. When the candles flickered and died, he lit another, the small flame casting long shadows against the shelves. He was not just studying, he was sharpening his mind into a weapon. He moved from New York to London, trading the humiliation of his childhood for the most rigorous academic credentials in the world. He spent his nights analysing statutes, drafting arguments, and mapping the architecture of equality. His hands, once denied a cup of water, now held the power to challenge the foundations of an empire. He finished his final thesis, packed his notes, and stood up. The boy who was once told he was a pollution had vanished. In his place stood a strategist, his mind a library of laws, his resolve absolute. The year was 1927. Bimrao stood before the Chavdar tank in Mahad, the water reflecting the harsh glare of the midday sun. A crowd gathered behind him, their breathing shallow, their eyes fixed on his every movement. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of a century of silence. He walked forward, his boots crunching against the dry earth, closing the distance between his past and his future. He reached the stone edge of the tank and stopped. The silence deepened. He did not look back at the men and women watching him. He kept his gaze locked on the surface of the water. He knelt, the stone cold against his knees, and extended his hands. He cupped them, breaking the surface tension of the water with a slow, deliberate motion. He lifted the water to his lips and drank. The sound of him swallowing was the only noise in the entire square. He stood up, water dripping from his chin, and turned to face the crowd. One by one, the people behind him stepped forward to follow his lead. The barrier had been breached. The act was a declaration. The scene shifted from the open air of the tank to the hushed, cavernous halls of New Delhi. Bimrao sat at the head of the drafting committee, his desk buried under mountains of parchment and ink-stained drafts. He was no longer fighting for a cup of water. He was fighting for the soul of a nation. He spent months in that hall, his pen moving with surgical precision across the pages. When a committee member questioned the reach of a clause, Bimrao stood. He did not raise his voice. He laid out the history of the marginalised, his arguments sharp as a blade. He forced the committee to confront the reality of the excluded. He insisted that the word equality could not be a suggestion or a vague ideal. It had to be the law of the land, binding and absolute. He drafted the fundamental rights, carving them into the bedrock of the new democracy. He ensured that the protection of every citizen was not a privilege, but a birthright. He spent nights reviewing every comma and every condition, ensuring no loophole remained for discrimination to hide. As he finally set his pen down, the document before him was no longer just paper. It was a shield for the millions who had been denied a voice for centuries. In 1956, the journey reached its final horizon in Nagpur. Bimrao stood before a massive, silent gathering. He took a deliberate step forward, embracing Buddhism to sever the chains of the caste system forever. This was not a retreat, but a final, absolute liberation. He had spent his life transforming the humiliation of his childhood into the bedrock of a democracy. He walked away from the old structures, leaving behind a living document that granted dignity to millions. The boy who was once denied a cup of water had become the architect of a nation's soul. His life proved that determination could rewrite destiny. He left behind no monuments of stone, but a constitution that breathed justice into every citizen. The cycle of exclusion was broken, replaced by a foundation of equality. He had arrived at the end of his path,